Well, good morning, El Paso Bible Church. This is Pastor Josh, and we're continuing our study here in the book of Daniel for our Sunday School hour. Daniel chapter 7 begins there's a disjunction, not a disjunction, there's a change that takes place here. It's something that we might call, if we saw it in a movie, we might call it a flashback. I refer to it more as an appendix in the book because Daniel's no longer recording the events of the kingdom for the royal record. He's now relating things in the first person instead of the third person, becoming slightly less formal in that presentation. But he's going back and kind of filling in some of the gaps here in the book of Daniel based on things that he himself experienced that basically no one else did. And so we have him interpreting his own dreams rather than being called upon to interpret things for the kings of the kingdom. But if you have your Bibles with you, and I encourage you to do that one way or another. I don't know that many of us have the book of Daniel memorized. If you do, don't tell me, because I'll be sad that I don't, and that you have way more knowledge than I do. But if you do, feel free not to get your Bible. But if you need to, go ahead and pause this and open a Bible on your phone, on your tablet, and preferably a paper book. That would be my preference, to Daniel chapter 7. Now you'll recall that the end of chapter 6 was the writing on the wall chapter, that Belshazzar had his arrogant feast with an army that laid siege to him outside the walls, and he was thumbing his nose at the Medo-Persian Empire. And that did not end up so well. It was revealed to him that evening that he had been weighed and found wanting, and that his days had been determined. And that was it. The time was over. And he was slain that night, immediately after fulfilling his promise to Daniel to elevate his status. And the very last verse of chapter 6, verse 28 says this: "So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian." Remember, Darius ruled underneath Cyrus as the big guy, the big king over the empire. And so verse 1, again, is going to start not a prequel exactly, but a backtracking in the timeline. So it says here in verse 1 of chapter 7, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed." These are very common phrases that we've seen relating to other people here in Daniel, but now Daniel is experiencing them. "As he lay on his bed, then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it." Now I can list maybe on one hand the number of dreams that I could relate to you in my lifetime, my whole life, anything about them. I can tell you that at times my dreams have been troubling, at times my dreams have been pleasing, but if you want to ask me about the details, I will not remember them. And so this ability that they have in this book to recall their dreams, of course, is a significant thing. Most people have impressions at best of their dreams. But Daniel writes down the dream, at least what it kind of indicates in the text, a summary of what he saw. Verse 2 says this: "Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea." That would be a reference to the Mediterranean Sea, the great sea that was in their experience. In the first year of Belshazzar, this took place. And we didn't really talk about it. We said it was a date stamp. The first year of Belshazzar was about, I think it's 14 years or so prior to the events that took place that ended up costing Belshazzar his life in his arrogant feast that he had. This was the first year that he became co-regent with his father Nabonidus. Now, we talked about the ambiguity in the succession that took place. There was a lot of problems. People got killed. People didn't get killed. People took the throne from other people. It happened. But Belshazzar was actually the co-regent with his father Nabonidus. And so that helps us to understand why Daniel's a little cold. I mean, he's more than that. He's stone cold. When he talks to Belshazzar, he's like, you keep your stuff, you keep your promises, here's the dream. You're not going to be able to keep any of that anyway, really, personally. You're not going to be able to personally guarantee that any of it happens. But it's because 14 years earlier, he had been told exactly how this was going to go down. He was unsurprised about the sudden ending of Belshazzar's tenure. On this night, Daniel has his own dreams and his own visions. And it starts with this: these four winds or these four spirits, likely I'm going to come down on this being angelic beings. That seems to be the agents of these sorts of things in the dreams that are in Daniel. But certainly the indication is that it is a being of spiritual power, and they're visible because he's not only seeing the effect, he can see the cause. And that's not something that we talk about the wind. We say, oh, well, we can't see the wind, but we can see its effects. But Daniel seems to be able to see all of it. And so I'm going to give these guys personhood and say that these are four spirits, which I would understand to be angelic beings. And it says he's stirring up the great sea, stirring it up. I don't know how great of a spirit you have to be to actually cause tumult on the sea like this, a great sea. You all... Probably when you were kids, we had an above ground pool for many years in our backyard, and the one thing that we always regressed to was that all of us in the pool and all the neighborhood kids got in the pool. There was way too many kids in the pool. I mean, I am really uncomfortable with that these days, but there were a lot of kids in the pool from the neighborhood. And eventually somebody would organize the whirlpool. We would all go in a row, and then we would take turns trying to swim against it as we created this circular current. And that pool was very small compared to the ocean. This is a powerful image of this being brought to a tumultuous state, just roiling and being disturbed here. And in the midst of this, if you see that taking place, now we have to say that this is probably at a miraculous level, which means that it's not just stormy season, it was beyond that. This is a roiling sea, tumultuous sea. And he says this in verse 3, and four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. So he could see that. These are not sea monsters exactly, but they are beasts that are coming out of this tumultuous sea. It says the first was like a lion. The first was like a lion, and he had the wings of an eagle. And I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. So you need to understand something, that in the historical record, we have representations that are frequently assigned to kingdoms. And for Babylon, both the lion and the eagle were the animal representations, the symbols of that kingdom. And so what Daniel sees is this lion with eagle's wings. Historical references to Babylon. And I believe that that's intended to be kind of a timestamp for Daniel himself. Because there's several explanations, and I don't buy them all. I'm just going to give you mine. Is that okay? I hope it's okay, because that's all I'm going to do, and this is a video, so you can't even complain real well. But I believe that it's a time stamp for Daniel. It's a date stamp of his expectations. How much of this am I going to have to live through? How much of this am I going to see? How much of this is going to take place during my lifetime? And so we have this picture of the lion, and its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. Now, you may remember the parallel to Nebuchadnezzar's experience late in his reign. He sat there in his home at ease, and all of a sudden he's told, you're going to have the mind of an animal. You're going to eat grass like an ox, and the dew is going to rest on your back, and it's going to be 7 years until you come back to your senses, and you're given the mind of a man, right? And so his kingdom progress, when these wings are plucked, certainly that's an indication that the forward progress of his kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar was an able ruler, an able leader who progressed his kingdom beyond most that we could fathom. He was a capable man. But, of course, without the mind of a man, he was not able to continue that progress. And so his wings were plucked, and he was lifted up from the ground. We're talking about his restoration now. So now he was lifted up to the ground, and he stood on 2 feet like man, and a human mind was given back to him. It doesn't say back to him, but a human mind was given to him. I think that's a very close parallel to the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And that's very important for Daniel, what his expectations were in seeing that, because immediately following Nebuchadnezzar, there's a succession problem after succession problem after succession problem. And he needs to know, I mean, he's has expectations of these kingdoms coming in this dream that we're seeing. So here's a timestamp. Where does this start? Did it start already when I was a young man? Did it start when I was an older man? Is it going still future? I say, no, Babylon has this beginning, and this is where we're starting the vision. This is the timestamp for you. I'm talking about Nebuchadnezzar's restoration. So he would know that he should not personally expect to witness all of these events that he's having in this dream. So, let's continue. There's 4 beasts, and that's the first one, this lion with the eagle's wings on it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. Now I'm going to tell you, in real life, you ought to take bears seriously. Even small bears will mess you up. But they look kind of goofy, don't they? They look like a cross between, like, I don't even know. They don't seem like they're meant to walk on land. They don't really seem to really be, they're kind of cumbersome looking. Especially right before they go into the winter and they're all blubbery and everything. Our cartoons and whatever seem to kind of make fun of bears too. Now, I mean, again, you should take them seriously in real life. But this is definitely not sleek like a lion with eagle's wings. This is not the same type of kingdom. And of course, Daniel said that. They're not the exact same. All the beasts were different. All of them were different from each other. But they have some corollaries, some analogs to each other, just like we have analogs to animals. But of course, we're different than them. We've been created differently. Another beast, a second one resembling a bear. So it looks a little cumbersome, perhaps, but it's weird because it was raised up on one side. I don't know how you do that. It doesn't sound very comfortable. But remember, this is the kingdom that's coming after Babylon. Historically, we know, though Daniel perhaps did not know, he might have been able to kind of guess at that point 14 years earlier from the event in which the Medo-Persian Empire conquered Babylon. But he sees this, and it's not as sleek as this kingdom. He sees the bear, but remember, it was 2 parts to it. We call it the Medo-Persian Empire. It was originally the Mede Empire, but the Persians quickly overtook the prominence in that kingdom. And so perhaps that's the indication here, that this is, bear is represented as cumbersome because it's actually a conglomeration of 2 kingdoms, the Medes and the Persians. And it's resembling a bear, and he's got 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. I think that's indicating 3 kingdoms that were conquered by this Medo-Persian Empire. It seems to be that way. There's some discussion about which 3 kingdoms it is. I don't really care. I think it's important for Daniel to recognize because he was going to see this transition. He was going to see this take place in a historical way. He was going to witness it. And so for us, it may not be that important because we see the absolute chronology. We're not seeing it ahead of time. We're not seeing it as a prophecy. We're not expecting to see this in our lifetime. We look back and say, well, yeah, clearly, that's what it was. So it's not really important that we understand which each rib is. But they consumed 3 ribs. Doesn't even sound like a decent portion. But anyway. That's what they arise, devour much meat. That's the command. Arise, devour much meat. Do what you do, bear. Go ahead and do that thing that you do. You consume these 3 kingdoms. Go consume some more. And likely these are other kingdoms that are being consumed by the empire. So, an observant person who had seen Nebuchadnezzar's plight, had seen Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation and his restoration, who had witnessed the succession issues that had taken place after his death, all the way up to the first year of Belshazzar's reign as co-regent, could likely see that there was a decline in progress. There's a decline, and it would not be terribly long before this first transition takes place, at least not in historical terms. Kingdoms often don't fall overnight, though in Babylon's case they kind of did. But it was 14 years from the time that Daniel received the prophecy. So the bear kingdom was given a command, marching orders, go be a bear, go consume a lot of meat, go do that. And so from that, now I think people go too far with what this says. What this says is that with God's people, God's nation, under discipline, in exile, under these kingdoms, that there is not a single step that they take in order that is not explicitly commanded by God. Now, is that exactly, perfectly, strongly deterministic, particularly deterministic for every move that every kingdom makes? I don't think so. Because these kingdoms are being related to Daniel in regards to his plight as a Jewish man in exile, receiving this revelation about his people and about God's plan and purpose for them, all the way, way into the future. So I don't think that we, certainly when I say, and people sometimes frown at me when I say this, that we have too simplistic of a view of God's sovereignty. God's sovereignty ultimately means, and that's how we describe it, by the way, that's not a biblical term. God is referred to as the Almighty. He's referred to as the All-Powerful. He's the one referred to as the right to rule. And that's how I understand the sovereignty, is that God certainly has the right, the prerogative to move any event he feels like, any event that he wants for his purpose. And that's not a matter of my permission. That's just what I think that's what Scripture says. But particularly when it comes to interactions with the nation of Israel, particularly at this time in history, this nation in exile under discipline, that these acts, these decisions, these actions that these kingdoms are taking are explicitly delineated and particularly determined. We shouldn't go too far and say that every act of every kingdom is, because what kingdom do we have to include in that? Oh wait, you can't answer. See, this is the difficulty here. So you have to include every kingdom, every nation, every people, every tribe, every tongue. And so you have a problem there, because then you have God having declared, planned, and purposed apostasy on the part of Israel. And he did not do that. He gave them a contingency. He said, if this happens, this is going to take place. As long as you are obedient, as long as you embrace obedience and fellowship, as long as you experience these things and do these things in the land, you will have abundance, you will have peace, you will have prosperity, you will have big families, even your dogs and your livestock, everybody will have big families. There won't be any death, abnormal death here. You'll have long lives, happy lives, peaceful lives. And if you don't, you can read this. It's in Deuteronomy 28. I mean, I'm paraphrasing a lot of information. If you don't, this will be your experience. You won't have any peace, you won't have any prosperity, and you won't be in the land. And you won't be happy. So I don't see God purposing that event when he gives clearly a contingency, clearly an alternative. You can obey or you cannot obey, and there are different consequences for that. So let's understand sovereignty biblically. And I say this a lot, and you may even be getting tired of it. But I don't care, because this is very important, this thing that we understand about the way history works. So, verse 6, we have another beast. After this, I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard. A leopard, a big cat, spots, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. And the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So we have a chronological listing. It starts with a timestamp with Nebuchadnezzar, with his humiliation and restoration, and ultimately the transition from Babylon falling to the Medo-Persian Empire. And now we have another transition that is prophesied, that is foretold here, in that we have a leopard with 4 wings of a bird, and this is very important. Again, we look at history and we see no breaks in the chronology, and so we know that this is talking about Greece, and it fits. Alexander the Great conquered very swiftly, as if he was flying on 4 wings. It took only 4 years to conquer the Medo-Persian Empire, which was a vast, vast majority of what even was the known world at that time. 4 years. The guy is riding a horse and walking everywhere. We don't have any, airlines. We don't have any troop transports. He's got to walk over the whole thing or ride over the whole thing with an army, and he's got to feed the army. It was amazingly fast. And so he conquered the empire of the Medes and the Persians. But he lived a short life. I forget exactly how old he was. We'll have to ask Bill Holmes, because Bill Holmes has this material memorized. He's got it down. But I don't remember what he said when I asked him how old Alexander the Great was. But he was, I believe, in his early 30s when he passed. Certainly in his 30s somewhere, I believe. He was a young man. And when he passed, his kingdom was divided 4 heads into what is called a tetrarchy. And so these tetrarchs broke up the kingdom and ruled portions of it. And so even though this hasn't happened yet, we can go back to the chronology. We can see historicity that took place here. We can see a historically reliable account that Daniel is seeing ahead of time with a perfect time stamp with no gaps, actual tangible historical events, real kingdoms with real kings that really lines up with real history. And so he says this leopard is the third beast. And he ruled. Dominion was given to it, even through these tetrarchs, through these 4 heads that took place. But there is a transition here. There is a difference. So remember, we said that all the 4 beasts, they were different from each other, and we understand that. A chimpanzee is different from other quadrupeds because he has opposable thumbs, right? But he still has 4 appendages. He still has a head. A monkey has a tail. If you watch VeggieTales, you may remember the song. If it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey, right? Monkeys have tails. So do dogs. They're similar. They have a lot of overlap in their appearance, but they are different. But this one is radically different from the other 3. After this, I kept looking in the night visions. And behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. Now, we've had some other indications that these other animals are very impressive. This one is just a terror-inspiring beast. Extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth, and it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth of all the things that this little horn could have, a big mouth. And a mouth uttering great boasts. We might understand it to be great blasphemies. He's got a terrible mouth on him, and it's big for a little horn. So he sees this beast, this 4th beast, like none of the others. We read a description, and I don't want to, jump to the end of the book, not the end of this book, but the end of the Bible to Revelation. Revelation 13:2 describes a mongrel kind of an animal that is pieced together from these other 3 animals, and that's why it's so different. Because it is made up from chunks of these other animals, and it's weird looking. It's not really a natural type animal at all. It's a different beast. And unlike the bear who was commanded to eat much meat, this beast just destroys utterly. Just tears things up, tramples it, devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. The difference would be, like you understand that certain predators eat meat, but occasionally you have a rogue predator. And normally a predator just kills what it eats. It runs off. If one fox will run off with a chicken. We've caught foxes at our house occasionally down in Spring Branch, or I guess we just caught one fox. I shot I don't know how many raccoons doing the same thing. But normal predators don't do that. They don't just they just kill what they eat. Right there and right there. They may carry it off, they may eat it there or whatever. But occasionally you have one that is a psychopath, that in the animal world is a sociopath, actually. A mass murderer. And you'll have one raccoon that'll just kill 20 chickens in the chicken coop just for grins. You'll have one dog that'll go in and kill all the animals in an enclosure rather than one, just to eat. And that's a radically different thing. As I've described, it is a sociopathic behavior when we see that in a human, when a human chooses to engage in this kind of destruction. He trampled all the beasts that went before it, and it had 10 horns. Now you may be aware, we don't have a great picture from Daniel's description. We get a terrifying description of this animal here, but it has 10 horns, and you may be aware that a horn is a symbol of power, a symbol of rulership in the ancient world. And so we know that all of these other things took place. We know that these are actual historical events that are highly reliable that Daniel has seen, starting again from Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation and restoration near the end of his reign. He ruled for a few years after that. Rapid succession, rapid decline of the Babylonian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire came in, bam. The Greeks, bam, they came in, took over the Medo-Persians. And so we should expect, and this is where people get hairy, they get really wonky in their explanation of this fourth beast. We should not expect some frou-frou, figurative government, nation, kingdom, whatever, some weird representation of this. We should expect a real kingdom, a real nation, somehow with 10 horns on it and one big mouth little horn. Because people are confused about this. They're confused about the nature of a kingdom. A kingdom has to have a land. A kingdom has to have a king. The king has to normally be on the earth for that to be the case. If the king gets on a spaceship, I would imagine that we would divest him of his kingship. If he was going off to colonize another planet somewhere, we need somebody here that's going to rule. A kingdom has land. A kingdom has inheritance. A kingdom has a succession plan when a human being is ruling over, because we die. But if the king doesn't die, which we'll get to that, there's no need for a succession. That's what we've seen here in the kingdom. We've seen successions within kingdoms and without, between kingdoms, excuse me. So we don't need to change the definition. Just because the beast is terrifying, just because the beast has 10 horns, and we can't imagine that. Of course, you've probably never seen a leopard with 4 wings, and you've never seen a lion with wings. But this is weird. This is a weird beast. In fact, in a book I was reading, I forget which book it was, Dr. John Wall, he probably said it a bunch over the time that he taught Daniel and Revelation and prophecy. But he said the identity of the fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7 is the most important interpretive problem in the book of Daniel. And I'm probably paraphrasing him a little bit, but I think that's pretty close. And if John Walvoord considered that to be the greatest interpretation problem, I'm going to raise my hand and say, yeah, I think I agree with that. He was not a perfect man, but of the men that walk on the earth, he's probably knew the most about this of anyone that I've ever read. So, you see this beast, and he's got 10 horns, but you know, like when you're in a small room or you're in an enclosed space and all of a sudden somebody's cell phone goes off? No, yeah, that does happen. I've learned to tune it out quite a bit, but everyone goes and looks over where it is. It's distracting. And what we have here is all these events are unfolding, these visions are unfolding, and Big Mouth, Little Horn over there is just cussing up a storm, blaspheming up a storm, yelling out loud. And Daniel is watching, and he's contemplating the complexities of what he's seeing, right? But he says, I was contemplating the horns. Behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. In the midst of that, you have to really exercise a lot of focus to maintain your attention. But he keeps looking. He keeps looking. Verses 9 to 12 here says, I kept looking until thrones were set up. Until thrones, not just one throne, which tells us something about the nature of what's happening here. There is a singular place for this character that is about to be introduced, but there are thrones also. There, presumably, you don't go through the trouble of making a throne if you're not going to have somebody sit in it. And this is something that people don't understand. See, most of you have probably never built a chair. The hardest thing to do in a wood shop, hands down, is to build a comfortable chair. And it was so difficult, especially with hand tools, for many, many, many thousands of years, that only kings got to do it, and they didn't bother doing it for kings that weren't going to sit on them, or rulers anyway, who were going to sit on them. So if there are thrones here in an ancient Near Eastern record, you can bet that there are bodies to warm them. That's going to become important. So they kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. So assuming that this is a central place that he's able to be witness, his vesture was like white snow. We don't use the word vesture, that's his clothes. He had a robe on that was gleaming white, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, also gleaming white. His throne was ablaze with flames, and here's the best part about it, it has wheels. The wheels were like a burning fire. This is an amazing machine that he's sitting on, this throne here. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. This is an impressive sight. See, right now you're impressed by the emptiness of parking lots. You're impressed by the lack of traffic. One day soon, you may complain that that's no longer the case. But this is impressive. Myriads upon myriads, an uncountable number. You could sit there the rest of your life and you wouldn't be able to count all these people. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, serving him. Myriads upon myriads were standing before him. There were so many people that they could not find something to do in front of the Ancient of Days, I presume. But they're here to witness these events. Because Daniel reads and he says the court sat or was seated and the books were opened. We have a courtroom proceeding. And then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. Somebody's got to deal with this guy, right? See, you might do that. You might do that. If you note somebody in public who is screaming obscenities, screaming blasphemies, who is perhaps even threatening violence on anybody around. Listen, most people are going to sit there and go, I'm going to keep watching because somebody is going to do something. We're not all going to put up with this. Well, guess what? In our society, there is a massive problem with observers who are not willing to take action. But there's not a problem in the Ancient of Days courtroom with not taking action. And I think Daniel has that understanding. He has the understanding of this inclination. And so he wants to see this. I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. And I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. Now remember, he's a little horn. He's attached to the head of the beast. The horn doesn't live without the beast. This is the action that was taken, given to the burning fire. He says, verse 12, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away. In other words, they did not have the same power, did not have the same glory that they possessed. They were no longer in charge, and they would not be in charge, but they didn't die. An extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Does God do what he wants? Yes, he does. Is he sovereign over the affairs of men? Yes. Is he sovereign over the affairs of a nation? Does he take these three nations and grant them life for an appointed period of time? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Does he do that for every nation? We don't know. Because what this says is that he did it for those three nations. But Daniel's he's going to continue looking. This is impressive. He doesn't want to miss out. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Now those two verses, you know those two verses. Those are the verses that we read around the holidays. Those are the verses that get read. Those are the two that most everybody knows from Daniel. They at least recognize them. It means they are significant and important verses. But I am so glad that we don't just jump around at El Paso Bible Church, that by the time we get to Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, we have done all the other verses, because it makes so much more sense that way. He keeps looking, and one like a son of man comes and is presented to the Ancient of Days. He's going to receive something from him. Presented to the Ancient of Days, he is given rulership, dominion. He is given glory and a kingdom. 3 things so far. My finger's a little crooked these days, but I can do 3 now. Dominion, glory, and a kingdom. And that kingdom is not just a small geographic area. Because it could have been. Kingdoms were sometimes coincident with just cities at that time. You could be the king over just a city, which was probably the size of my neighborhood here in Conatillo, Texas. But he said this kingdom is expansive. Expansive, not expensive, though probably it's priceless. It's expansive because it's all the peoples, the nations, and the men of every language. Now what you should take from that is that there are still nations in this kingdom. They are subjected to the one kingdom of the one like a son of man that was granted to him by the Ancient of Days. But there is an administration of nations within that. And men of every language, so that they might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. In other words, once it comes, it's a permanent state. Once it comes, the fact of the Son of Man's rulership does not pass away. The kingdom does not pass away in this very real sense. And the peoples, the nations, and the men of every language serve him forever, and he has that glory forever. Now I say that because there are a lot of people that think that this kingdom language is something that describes the church. Let me tell you what, I jokingly call this the moneymaker. It hasn't made me much money. But listen, if I'm a part of that kingdom, I expect to be a lot more glorious. I expect for the glory of the kingdom to kind of exude. I expect to not have pandemics in a glorious kingdom. I expect not to have crooked politicians in the kingdom. I expect to not have unwise politicians in the kingdom. I expect for this kingdom to continually subject all nations to itself, meaning that they're going to be on the same page, they're going to be coincidental in their pursuits as well as cooperative in their pursuits. If these things don't describe your experience, guess where you are not? You are not in the kingdom. You're not in the kingdom. You are not in the kingdom. Because that hasn't happened yet. This is a permanent state. And this kingdom will not be destroyed. Never. It's a permanent thing. Its glory will not be diminished. And all the peoples, nations, and men of every language will serve him. Now that's all the time that we have for this morning. I know your Bible says vision interpreted next, so we're going to get to that next week. Well, actually not next week. So next week is May 10th, and we're going to have our first live service of the pandemic year here at El Paso Bible Church. And in so doing, at first, we are going to not have our Sunday school hour, but we will regroup. We will continue this shortly, perhaps the following week. So when that takes place, I'll see you then. Bye.